All right, what up, guys? So they launched the Season 8 PTR patch notes. The PTR itself is going to be on the 11th. So today for me is the 7th, about to be the 8th. So a couple days from now. So I figured we'd go over all of the powers, what we think about them, and things to pair them up with. I made a post just a second ago, actually. One of the powers I think is actually going to be really, really good in a certain situation. When we get there, we get there. But anyway, let's start from the top. These are the ones that can be acquired at any difficulty level. Wandering Death's Chest Beam says, while channeling a skill, spawn a beam that deals 300% frostbite damage per second. Enemies hit take 50% multiplicative increased damage from you for 1 second. I think this might be pretty good for some of the channeled abilities. You have Stone Burst and Dance of Knives. Um, it depends on how the beam works. If it works exactly like the Wanderer's thing, where it just kind of sweeps the screen really quick, probably would be worth it. If it doesn't, and it's just like one little concentrated beam, probably not, because then you have to get this 50% increased damage for 1 second. That implies that it hits them directly, right? And you have to get lucky if it's like one little straight beam or some random beam. And it also is only for 1 second, so I don't know. Dance of Knives. I don't know how Stone Bursts work, and I don't know how often it like explodes. Dance of Knives. I don't know. The more I think about it, like 1 second might just be too slow if it only does like a sweeping motion, but it could be good. The modifier for it. So okay, if you guys don't know, you get one main power with 3 modifiers. Is how they're doing this. And everything has a main power and everything has a modifier, but you can only choose one of them in your main slot and 3 of them in your modifier slot. So the modifier for this one, your boss power instantly executes non-boss enemies hit. We don't care about this. When you execute an enemy, you gain 25 resource. The whole thing with like instantly executing enemies with low life is pointless, because if you have them at 15%, hopefully they just die no matter what, because most builds are trying to aim to do a lot more damage than that. Shava's Poison Breath. Hitting an enemy afflicted by damage over time spawns a wave of acid that deals 400% poisoning damage over 4 seconds. Applies 10% more poisoning for each 1% of the target's current life affected by damage over time. This is a lot of convoluted words. I don't really think it'll be worth anything. Unless they do something really gnarly with poison this season, like something that comes out of the blue. But even then, just having like 400% poisoning damage, it could be good, it could be bad. But I think you're better off doing something else in your main slot. Modifier. Once per activation, damaging an enemy with your main boss power also applies 45% poisoning damage to it for over 3 seconds. Same thing. I think there's something better that can probably go into the modifier slot. Unless there's just some build out there that is obscure. Avarice's Explosive Ore. When you gain excess primary resource, you spawn a piece of ore, and after 2.5 seconds, it explodes, dealing 7% fire damage, and you can spawn 3 pieces of ore at once. Maybe a build that, like Fireball, maybe. Incinerate, possibly. Be hard to say. Incinerate constantly channels, but if you had like lucky hit the... No. I think this is just ass, personally. Maybe I'm wrong. Prove me wrong. I think you're better off. I mean, 700% fire damage is cool. It's the gaining the excess resource, I guess. Fireball, maybe. Incinerate, probably not, because you're not really worried about resource. And nothing else really uses a bunch of fire damage. I mean, I guess maybe the new Earthquake barb that came out this season, since it uses, you do the thing where you turn it into all fire damage. So I really don't see this being worth it. And activating your main boss, the modifier is actually really good. Activating your main boss power spends all of your primary resource to increase its damage by 1.5% per resource point cast. Let it be noted, this is the damage of your boss power. It doesn't increase your damage, so it just depends on if your boss power is the source of your damage. And I could see it where if you use maybe like a basic class, like a basic attack skill, and you're gaining resource and spawning the ores. No, you wouldn't spawn the ores, because I don't think you can have the same thing. I don't know. It depends on what you're doing is if your boss power is the main source of your damage, which odds are it's probably not. I haven't seen any of them that are like the main source of damage so far. Could be good though. Could be good. Elect's Talons. Casting a basic skill applies 200% sparking damage over 4 seconds to enemies hit. What is sparking damage? I don't know. It sure sounds like lightning damage to me, but it's called sparking, so it's just like a little bit worse. Don't really see this one being used very much. Modifier, gain 5% movement speed, increased by 0.5% for each 1% cooldown reduction you have up to a maximum of 11%. I don't really see this being useful. We don't really worry about movement speed all that much anymore. Like, we want it if we can get it, but you pretty much just stack everything you can into damage instead of worrying about movement speed anymore, whereas in previous seasons we were all about speed farming and shit. So, yeah, it's not really worth it. I don't think anything about this one's good. Beastmaster's Training. This will be good for minions. Whenever you cast the summon skill or call a mercenary for reinforcement, fuck that last part. One of your summons or mercenaries taunts enemies and gains 40% damage reduction. That part, not so much. It's the next part. The modifier is what I meant being used. Your summons deal 5% more damage, increased by 25% for each 1% bonus critical strike damage you have from items and Paragon, up to a maximum of 17%. So pretty much at, what is it, 68% critical strike damage from your Paragon and items, you'll get another 17%. Or you'll get 17% total. These two combined together. You'll get a maximum of 17%. Blackmailer's Sabotage. Casting a core skill while you have a barrier knocks down close enemies for 1.1 seconds. And this is bad. Nobody cares. Whenever you gain Fortify, getting an additional 20% amount as barrier. Also, nobody cares because typically that interaction is way easier without wasting a slot, since you only get 3 modifiers. Flesh Reaper's Disruption. Damaging a vulnerable enemy removes the vulnerable and then stuns them. This stun applies 100% more stagger to bosses. It's not really worth. Gain this part, maybe. Gain 5% multiplicative vulnerable damage increased by 0.25% for each 1% crowd control duration bonus you have up to a maximum of 10.5%. So you can get, pretty much you can get 10.5% more damage. So this modifier, I can see it being used. 10% damage isn't nothing when it's multiplicative anyway. Take a sip of my coffee here. Hatred's Embrace. Haste. That's a... Ugh. Casting a shadow or fire skill grants 1.1%. Dude, I trip over my words constantly. I apologize, guys. Casting a shadow or fire skill grants 1.1% increased movement speed for 3 seconds up to 11%. Gain 5% critical strike chance increased by 0.5 for each 1% shadow resistance you have. This stuff's not very good. I guess the modifier could be used if you, say you have a slot from modifier that, like, it doesn't, for whatever build you're using, it doesn't really do anything. So, like, maybe, you know, like, just to get more critical strike chance, to get a 22% critical strike chance. But, like, I don't know. I don't see either one of these being super prominent. Karma's Sparks. When you evade, apply, there's that sparking damage again to close enemies. Like, what the hell is sparking damage? Your evade CD is reduced by 5%, increased by 0.2% for each 1% lightning resistance from bonuses you have up to 11%. Unless they bring back, like, evade Spiritborn, I don't think anybody cares about this. Outlaw Sharpshooter's Eye. Dealing direct damage to a distant enemy slows them and surrounding enemies by 0.4%, or not 0.4, sorry, 40%. No. Modifier, you deal increased damage to enemies the further away they are from you, up to 10.5. Now this would be something we would be using on, like, random arrows this season, so it depends on if that sticks around for next season. I don't think it will, because there hasn't been a lot of shit that just, like, adds damage to ultimate. So there's no incentive to run ultimates, right? Or only ultimate skills. Like, I don't know if you guys noticed, but the top tiered builds this season are all ultimate skills. And it's just because of the way the witchcraft powers interact with them. Using a mobility skill burns close enemies for 200% burning damage over 4 seconds. Don't really think that'll be used all that much. Like, some of these ones that are like, it deals 200% burning damage or fire damage, they might be used in certain builds, but I don't think it'll be used in a main slot. Maybe some of the ones that are in the secondary slot. Modifier, gain 5% multiplicative increased damage to all elements. For each 1% of an element's resistance from bonuses, gain 0.2% increased damage for that element. This modifier will definitely be used in anything that uses elementals. So pretty much I think probably all builds for the sorcerer, maybe a couple builds for the Spiritborn, possibly the rogue because of the imbuement elements, possibly the barbarian too with the new chess piece and turning all your earthquakes into fire. This one has a lot of uses. I can see this modifier definitely being used. Scourge Toxins. When an enemy applies a damage overtime effect to you, apply 1000% poisoning damage to them over 4 seconds. This is not good because 1000 poisoning damage is decent, but This is reliant on an enemy applying DOT to you, and not all enemies apply DOT, so it's just really situational, and situational is not very good. When you take damage from DOT effect, see, there's that again, like, you have a 5% chance to be healed instead, increased by 50% of your poison resistance from bonuses up to a maximum of 12%. I don't think either one of these are going to be used. And here's the one that I think most builds will have in their main slot. So, and here's why. We'll get to that. Damaging a crowd-controlled enemy makes them and surrounding enemies unstoppable, but you gain 10.5% increased damage, attack speed, and movement speed. So this, I understand that like a lot of damage comes from making enemies crowd-controlled, but I think you can negate that extra damage in a lot of builds by on boots adding exploiters. Exploiters essentially will read that if you make an enemy crowd controlled and you hit them again, they become unstoppable. And when they become unstoppable, you will gain 40% multiplicative increased damage to them. And these can go on boots. That's the big one, is it goes on boots, so it doesn't take up any of the attack slots. And then on top of that, you also just gain attack speed and increased damage to them from the ability itself. So I think this will be used quite frequently. If not, I would be surprised. I could be wrong, and maybe a crowd controlling an enemy just gives you so much extra damage that it's not worth it. I don't really see that being the case. I think a lot of classes get like an extra 30% damage from a crowd controlled enemy. So that'll get negated by putting exploiters on boots. And then, yeah, that also frees up you to just like add damage in other ways. And in my opinion, this is the best one we've seen so far. If you disagree with me, you disagree. I haven't gone into like theory crafting any of these builds because I'm still on my Diablo 4 break, but of course I'm going to go over the patch notes as they came out, you know? The modifier is gain 5% attack speed, increased by 0.25% for each 1% damage crowd control enemies you have up to 10.5. I think this modifier will be used if you're not using it as a main. Because we were just talking about gaining attack speed is nice, especially if this is secondary attack speed. I don't really know. I don't think anybody knows until the game starts going. But if you guys don't know, you have two different buckets for attack speed, and both of them cap at 100%. But if you have 100% attack speed in your first bucket, you can still get some in your second bucket and gain more attack speed. If you want, there's a list online. I'm not quite sure where, but it will have which bucket things go into for each class. All right, so these ones have to be acquired in Torment 1 or higher. Belial's Crystal Decoy. When you cast an agility, defensive, or macabre skill, spawn a crystal that taunts enemies and explodes for 3 seconds, dealing 600% shadow damage. This might be useful, but the problem is it says when you cast, so I don't think it'll work if you're doing a channeling ability. If my kiddo's mad. If it did, then this would work with Dance of Knives. He's like slightly mad and slightly laughing at the television. It would work if you did like maybe possibly like a shadow imbuement Dance of Knives build, possibly. 600% shadow damage, like it's good. 600% is good, but it's hard to tell. If it does work that way, possibly. If not, then probably not. Activating your main boss power fears enemies for 0.75 seconds and deals 50% shadow damage to them. I don't think that'll be used pretty much at all. Lilith's Wind of Hate. And you get this one from beating Lilith, back to my arch enemy. When you cast a skill, attack enemies with a wave of spikes that lasts 2 seconds and deals 250% physical damage. Enemies take 60% increased damage from Winds of Hate each time it hits them, up to 300%. Possibly, maybe, it depends. If you make a build that really stacks physical damage, then maybe. But the damage itself has to come from the actual Winds of Hate skill. So I don't know. It's really hard to tell. I can see her doing the thing here, but it's still hard to tell without being in game. It is kind of brutal though, watching the body parts here fall apart. It's kind of metal. Modifier: hitting an elite enemy with a main boss power creates an inert blister cone with 10% of their maximum life for 15 seconds. Killing the blister removes 5.25% of the elite's life. An elite can have up to 3 blisters active. I think this is just probably not. So let me read this again. Hitting an elite enemy with a main boss power creates a blister cone with 10% of the creature's maximum life, you can have up to 3% or 3 blisters at once. So when you kill a blister, it'll remove 5.25% of their life. This is just way too much. Duriel's Burrow, though. When you evade, you now. I love this, even if it's not good. I actually haven't read this one yet. But I just like the burrowing underground shit, dude. Just like a fucking mole. Anyway, when you evade, you now burrow underground, immobilizing surrounding enemies for 5 seconds and dealing 200% on your entry and exit. You deal 200% damage every 0.25 seconds while burrowed. Evade's cooldown is increased by 4 seconds, and the cooldown reduction on evade is 50% as effective. So the evade's cooldown gets increased by 4 seconds, but your cooldown reduction on your evade is 50% as effective. So if you have CDR for evade, it's more effective for evade. So if you have 2 seconds, you get 3%. Or sorry, if you get 2 seconds, you get 3 seconds. I don't know. It depends on how much damage this actually does. But it could be a cool build where you just constantly are only underground and just kind of like boom, 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 kill everything. It'd be kind of cool. Modifier. Activating your main boss power grants you 21% increased dodge chance for 2 seconds. Whenever you dodge an attack, you immobilize nearby enemies. This could be pretty good. A lot of the builds on Rogue just do a lot of dodge chance, since you can get it really easy and you can just dodge everything and not have to worry about getting hit. So maybe if there's a free slot, this isn't completely useless. Belial's Eye Beams. After you drink a healing potion, gain 75% damage reduction for 2 seconds and summon eye beams that corrupt enemies for 1,750 damage over 3.5 seconds. Then your healing potion becomes disabled for 5 seconds. You may drink your healing potion at full health. Maybe. This is a lot of damage right here. Maybe. This is actually kind of lit. Activating your main boss power grants Unbreakable Stealth for 2 seconds. You deal 11% increased overpower damage while stealth. Just The while stealth part makes it kind of bleh. If it was just 11% increased overpower damage, it'd be dope. But while stealth, not so much. Even though everybody wears the chest piece now. But, nah. Andariel's Flaming Skull. After standing still for 1 second, summon a skull for 4 seconds that rotates around you and breathes fire that burns enemies for 1,200% damage over 3 seconds. That sounds metal as can be. Burning enemies take 21% more damage from your DOT effects for 5 seconds. After activating your main boss power, all of your other attacks burn enemies for 1800% damage over 3 seconds. I can see this being used in a lot of burning things like Incinerate and all that. My kiddo's getting mad at me over here. I'm almost done. Beast in Ice's Sleet. After casting 3 skills which apply CC or stagger effects, shoot out sleet spikes that deal 800% cold damage and freeze enemies. It'd be kind of cool. Your main boss power now chills enemies at damages for 2.5%. So this right here, believe it or not, I think could be useful in some classes. Because it will make it where your main boss power, as long as you have one that does damage, it will chill enemies. And then like on sorcery, you have like damage to chilled or damage reduction from chilled. It doesn't matter if it actually ever freezes them. Just the fact that they're chilled, you'll get some kind of effect from it. I don't know if it'll be used, but it could be used that way, which would be interesting. After you cast a core skill, lightning tiles outwards for 1.2 seconds, dealing 300% lightning damage per strike. This will be pretty cool for chain lightning. Once per activation, damaging an enemy with your main boss power stuns enemies. This part isn't good. This part's okay. The thing is, you can only have one main boss power, so I just don't really know which ones would be best with certain things, which is actually really good. It makes me feel like they get some diversity going on. Lord Zur's Blood Pool. After you damage an enemy, spawn a pool of blood that deals 400% bleeding damage per second. Over 4 seconds, you can have up to 3 active pools. That's kind of cool if bleed goes anywhere. It hasn't done any. It hasn't been like the main anything for several seasons. Activating your main boss power heals you for 5.5% of your maximum life over 3 seconds. Yeah, that's not very good. Varshan's Lifesteal. Obtained after defeating the Initiate layer boss Varshan. Every time you lose 25% of your max life, attach a leeching beam to an attacker which restores 10% of your maximum life and deals 1200% corrupting damage over 3 seconds to them. And then that's not very good. And then activating your main boss power inflicts nearby enemies with 200% corrupting damage over 2 seconds. I'm trying to speed through these last little bits. Bubba's over there just having a fit. Okay, main. After you cast an ultimate skill, lob 4 bombs that deal 800% fire damage and reduce your ultimate skills Cooldown by 5 seconds. This could be interesting. It depends on if ultimate skills make a comeback or not. And if you can get your ultimate skill down to 5 seconds, and then every time you cast the ultimate, it resets it. That would be kind of cool. Not sure. Maybe you can get them down to like 8 or 9 seconds that I know of right now, but like I don't know if you can really do more past that. Modifier. Killing an enemy with your main boss power reduces your ultimate skills cooldown by 0.2 seconds. You have to kill an enemy with the main boss power, though. I don't think that'll be used for anything. And then lastly, Harbinger of Hatred's Volley. After damaging a vulnerable enemy, shoot piercing projectiles that last 1.3 seconds, dealing 400% fire damage and applying vulnerable. After damaging, I mean, I guess they apply. I mean, this enemy is already vulnerable, so I guess it just makes the enemies behind it vulnerable. I don't know. Deals 40% multiplicative increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Yeah, no. Modifier. Casting a basic skill while at maximum resource spends it all to make all nearby enemies vulnerable. Activating your main boss power grants 11% increased vulnerable damage for 5 seconds. This will be used 100% in the modifier slot because even if you don't care about the beginning part, activating your main boss power will grant you 11% increased vulnerable damage. And this is just new stuff. This is not what this is about. The lair boss rework's interesting a little bit though. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you guys think about the new boss powers. This is the main part of the new season. Let me go ahead and we're gonna steal this right here for our thumbnail. I'll just do that while we're recording, so we'll just save as capture and boom. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all the generic YouTube stuff, and tally ho.